Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, a new report out of California details their gay certification program. Sound ridiculous? Well, it is. We'll have all the details coming up. And a good Friday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget that you can take the show with you 24/7 on demand. It's totally free to do so. Just head on over to your favorite podcast app, search for the Nick Craig Show, tap the follow or subscribe button. You'll take a new program with you each and every weekday morning. You can also listen online by visiting the website nickcraig.com. Our show this morning brought to you by the Law Group here in Wilmington. For any legal questions or challenges, visit them online, lawgroupnc.com. We'll hear more from them coming up a little bit later on in the program this morning. I caught what I believe to be one of the most ridiculous articles I have ever come across back earlier this week. It was published over at the City Journal by an individual by the name of Christopher Rufo. He works for the Manhattan Institute and Hillsdale College. The City Journal is the news publication of the Manhattan Institute. And here is the headline: Inside California's Gay Certification Program. With the subheadline, the state is pressuring utilities to award $633 million in contracts to LGBTQ businesses, and how this entire program works out. So this is dealing with California's public utility system. And so before we get into any details on this gay certification program and how exactly something like this works, which, by the way, is completely discriminatory, we'll get into this a little bit later on. The DOJ is already looking into California and this new policy, again, because that's exactly what is going on in the state of California. They're actively discriminating against business owners based on sexuality, regardless of whether they are preferencing or not preferencing LGBTQ businesses. They are actively discriminating. Harmeet Dillon has jumped in on that discussion. We'll get to her thoughts and comments coming up a little bit later on in the program. The whole thing is ridiculous. California, even today in 2026, is a state that consistently has rolling black and brownouts. Why? Because their utility system is a mess. Because they do not have capable, competent people making decisions about their energy grid. That is not something that a state in the United States of America should be dealing with on a semi-regular basis. Now, you'll have extremes, a crazy warm stretch, a crazy cool stretch that can cause issues on the grid. We've seen that here in North Carolina back just a couple of years ago, right before Christmas. And so we're not talking about these large-scale weather events that put ridiculous strains on the grid. We're talking about just any random time throughout the year, you will see alerts popping up that California is turning people's power off because they do not have the generating capacity, the generating ability to put power onto the line to deliver it to your homes and to your businesses. That is unfortunately a semi-common occurrence in the state of California. So with that pretext and that background information known, something like this is only even more damaging. When you've got a utilities commission and power grid operators in California that seemingly are incapable of doing their job anyway under normal circumstances, and now they are being pressured by the California Public Utilities Commission to award contracts, discriminatorily award contracts to gay-owned businesses in the state. So Christopher Rufo, as I mentioned, published this article this week over at the City Journal, and he starts off by saying, Americans are used to handouts for favored groups. Affirmative action in university admissions, we've already seen that play out at the United States Supreme Court. Corporate diversity initiatives and minority-owned contracting requirements direct opportunities, resources, and contracts to supposedly oppressed groups. In California, the state Democrats there have embarked on another kind of favoritism, contracts for state-certified gay-owned businesses. Can you come up with something more ridiculous? Oh, Hi, your business is gay certified according to the state of California. What are we doing? What are we doing? So here's a little bit of the article. The scheme operates through California's Public Utilities Commission, the CPUC, which regulates privately owned utility companies. California Utilities spent more than $43 billion in 2024 on contractors, which include groups like fuel suppliers, surveyors, engineers, and others whose work helped deliver water, gas, electricity, and internet service to California's 39 million residents. So the story starts back in 1986 when the then governor signed Assembly Bill 3678, which required certain California public utility regulated utilities to submit annual plans for buying goods and services from women and minority-owned companies. This is in the mid-'80s when this first really got kicked off, 86. 2 years later, the CPUC created its Supplier Diversity Program, which would enforce the law and set contracting goals for large utilities. Under a series of Democratic governors, writes the authors, the program had expanded to include gay-owned businesses. In September of 2024, then Governor Jerry Brown signed legislation requiring the California Public Utilities Commission to recognize LGBT-owned businesses as eligible for supplier diversity benefits. 5 years later, Governor Gavin Newsom, everybody's favorite, explained that the program further encourages other companies involved in the energy sector to award contracts to those gay-owned firms. In the years that followed, the California Public Utilities Commission faced activist pressure as it implemented the gay expansion, writes the authors. Build Out California, a since rebranded LGBTQ building industry organization, sent a letter to the commission arguing that homophobia existed within the ranks of the Utilities Commission. The state legislative LGBTQ caucus suggested in a 2021 letter that even considering lower gay procurement targets was a, quote, insult to the LGBTQ community. Folks, this is a real article written by a real author at a real publication. This is not The Onion. This is not the Babylon Bee. This is Christopher Rufo, who is a pretty well-known individual who works at the Manhattan Institute and writing for the City Journal. And you've got activist groups and the state legislature in California saying that, quote, lower gay procurement targets is I don't even know what that means. And this is what's going on in California. So that was in 2021 when the activists started getting more heavily involved. By 2022, the California Public Utilities Commission had fully implemented the expansion. In practice, this meant establishing a, quote, goal for utility companies with annual revenue exceeding $25 million to buy things from the state-certified LGBTQ businesses. 0.5% of procurement in 2022, 1% in 2023, 1.5% in 2024, and beyond. And if large California public utility regulated utilities met those goals in 2024, that would have sent roughly $633 million to these LGBTQ-owned firms. Here's the problem. This is why it's discrimination. A, you've got this so-called goal set up, which is actually discriminatory in itself. That's a major problem. And then, of course, the second part of this, and something that you've seen growing on the conservative right as a talking point in the years past. We have gone away from awarding contracts to the best capable individuals and only looking at things like race, sex, and now sexuality. Instead of procuring your product or your service from the best bidder, the one that can truly provide the best service, we've wiped all of that away in favor of these ridiculous subgroups. If you're a gay-owned business, if you're a women-owned business, a veteran-owned business, whatever sort of subcategory you fall in, you need to be able to compete with every other business in the marketplace. You should not be getting a benefit based on things that you can't change. And that's what is so ridiculous about so many of these pushes that are happening across the United States. I mean, that's the long and the short of this. These companies are not being picked because they can provide the best price and provide the best service. No, they're being picked because they're gay. That's the only prerequisite. And I would argue that that is not the best thing for the state of California, that does not help the residents of the state. But here we are. We have ignored every other sort of basic free market economy blueprint and have solely decided that we're going to look at things like your race, your sex, and your sexuality. It is so unbelievably ridiculous. Back to the story over at the City Journal written by Christopher Rufo. He is a fellow over at the Manhattan Institute, the City Journal, their news publication, covering what he is describing as California and its public utility authority pressuring utility companies across the state of California to award more than $600 million in special contracts to LGBTQ-owned firms. So this brings up an interesting question in the article, and the author, and Christopher Rufo, writes, "This scheme raises an obvious question. How does a business qualify as officially gay?" And I think that's a fair question when you are saying, as a Public Utilities Commission, forcing this onto your members, all of the power, electric, internet, all of the companies that fall under the umbrella of the Utilities Commission, you're going to give, and what you are saying is, we are going to give a leg up. We're going to give an advantage to firms that we find under this category. The question is, how do you verify that? So now California has a gay verification system. Take a listen to this. It gets even more crazy. According to this, paperwork is the way in which this is done. Supplier Clearinghouse, a group that certifies firms for the California Public Utility Program, features a list of qualifications linked on its website. Applicants can secure certification by providing a letter from an LGBTQ organization attesting to their sexual preferences, proof that a newspaper identifies them as LGBT, or 3 letters from personal contacts written on company letterhead attesting to their homosexual orientation. Corporate officials who, quote, falsely represent their business as gay face up to a year in county jail. What is going on here? So you need to be in a newspaper and be identified as LGBTQ, get a letter from an organization, or 3 letters from personal contacts written on company letterhead attesting that you're gay? It makes absolutely no sense. But don't worry, if those possibilities of certification aren't enough for you, how about this? Supplier Clearinghouse also accepts gay certification letters from the National LGBTQ Plus and Allied Chamber of Commerce. That chamber has its own list of accepted documents, including human resource complaints or police records claiming LGBTQ discrimination. As the NGLLCC states, that's the National LGBTQ and Allied Chamber of Commerce, certification is a journey, not a destination. Again, this is not parody. This is not April Fool's Day. This is a legitimate situation, a legitimate process set up, ongoing right now in the state of California. This is as real as could possibly be. So the author in this article over at City Journal, Christopher Rufo, decided to try and find somebody that has gone through this process to figure out exactly what is going on here. Marianne Horton has experienced this journey, quote unquote, firsthand. Horton, an early internet pioneer credited with helping develop the email attachment, is a white male who transitioned and is now married to a woman. Horton's company Red Ace is registered in California as a woman LGBT-owned business. But again, to note that originally Horton was a male. The application process, Horton told City Journal, required a, quote, mess of documentation to prove that Red Ace was lesbian-owned. Horton sent Supplier Clearinghouse a domestic partner affidavit to establish that the business was woman-owned. Horton submitted a birth certificate, which had been reissued in Washington state post-transition. To prove transgender status, Horton filed a therapist carrier letter, a document from a medical professional certifying transgender identity. These designations came with perks. After Red Ace secured these labels, Horton said that the San Diego Gas and Electric Cooperative brought the company on as a part-time cybersecurity contractor. During the hiring process, Horton told us a company official said that being on the diversity list made the contract much easier to secure. So again, I don't know anything about this Red Ace company, but according to company officials within San Diego Gas and Electric, one of the reasons why this company was brought on a part-time basis to provide cybersecurity contracting, which I would argue is pretty important for a gas and electric company, that was done in large part because the owner of the company is trans and married to a woman. That's the big certification. That made the process, quote, much easier to secure. So regardless of whether this is good cybersecurity contracting, whether this is effective cybersecurity contracting and will actually help and make sure that the utility doesn't become the victim of a ransomware attack, hacking from a foreign nation, as we've seen in years past, this is a very real thing. Many of these public utilities, whether we're talking about electric companies, gas companies, water utilities, whatever sort of public utility we're talking about, we have seen a huge rise in recent years over these companies getting and dealing with major cyber attacks. Why is that the case? Well, many of their systems are very antiquated. They have not been updated in some cases 20 or 30 years. They are very insecure, and they are very prone for bad actors, both domestically and internationally, to go after these kinds of utilities. And I mean, you want to see the beginning of societal collapse? Have major gas, water, and electric utilities be compromised and have power or water grids shut off for days, if not weeks at a time. I mean, if you really want to see the society in which we live right now completely crumble in front of your very eyes, turn off the water and turn off the power for an extended period of time. I mean, we saw this back just a couple of years ago. What was the major oil and gas hack that came through? Was it Dominion or whatever it was, the major gas line that went here through North Carolina, big cybersecurity attack there, caused major gas shortages in the southeast half of the United States. This is a real thing. And again, I'm not sitting here to pass any sort of judgment on Red Ace. I mean, if this is the policy set up in the state of California, I would argue that the owner of this company would be stupid not to take advantage of it. I mean, if this is the way in which the California public utility is wanting to operate, if you fall into one of these subclasses or categories, you're a fool for not taking advantage of it and using the system that is set out. And I don't know anything about the services that they provide. But again, going back to the main point here, when you start ignoring actual certification, aka are you going to do the job that you are being hired for, that you are contracting for efficiently and effectively, when you begin the process of ignoring that and hiring companies based off of things like their sexuality, their sex, their skin color, their religion, that doesn't make any sense. You should be hiring the best capable individuals regardless of what their background is. That's my problem, and I think that's the problem that many have here in America with some of these practices. You are actively discriminating against the best companies in the room so that you can go after these nonsensical hiring and contracting goals and agendas. It does not make anybody's life better. It does not make anybody's life easier. And when you're talking about government doing it, you are actually hurting said individuals that you are proclaiming to be responsible for when you are a public utility in the state of California. We'll get into some more details on this coming up. As I mentioned, the Department of Justice Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Harmeet Dillon, jumping into the fray on this conversation after this bombshell report from Christopher Rufo over at the City Journal published this week. We'll get into those details coming up here in just a couple of minutes. But before that, I want to thank the Law Group here in Wilmington and remind you that if you have any legal questions or challenges, make sure you put your trust in the Law Group. Going back to 2003, Melissa Gott and her experienced team of attorneys have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across the eastern half of North Carolina. It has been almost 6 years now since I went through the process of purchasing my home as a first-time home buyer. I will admit I was very green in the process, had obviously no experience doing so in the past. One of the first phone calls I made was to Melissa Gott, reached out to her and her team and said, hey, I'm buying a house. I'm going to need some help walking through this process. It was in the middle of COVID-19. Everything turned upside down. All of the questions, any problems that showed up, Melissa Gott and her team were incredibly responsive with that and made sure that they kind of walked with me every single step through that process and helped me go through that process of officially closing on my home. Their dedicated team made sure that all of my questions were answered, and they answered them as quickly as possible. They're located in downtown Wilmington and just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online, lawgroupnc.com. That's 910-251-6088, or online, lawgroupnc.com. It's the Law Group, experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate the Law Group, Melissa Gott, and her team for their continued support here of the Nick Craig Show. All right, we'll grab a quick break. More coming up after this as the Nick Craig Show continues, streaming live this morning, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. And welcome back to the Nick Craig Show. Thanks for spending some time with us today as we cover a ridiculous story over at the City Journal written by Christopher Rufo. He is a fellow over at the Manhattan Institute, the City Journal, their news branch, their news publication, with the headline, Inside California's Gay Certification Program, as the California Public Utilities Commission has now set contracting goals for public utilities, electric, water, gas, internet, anything that would fall under the umbrella of a public utility in the state of California to contract with LGBTQ-owned businesses. And that, of course, raises the question of how are those businesses certified that they are LGBTQ-owned? And according to Christopher Rufo and the investigative work that he did piecing this all together, it requires submitting affidavits, potential police reports if you were discriminated against or claimed you were discriminated against as an LGBTQ individual, HR complaints that you made at an employer, a marriage certificate, just a whole bunch of things to verify that you fall under the LGBTQ category. And of course, if you are found to have been forging said documentation to try and get an advantage, which is complete and total discrimination, you could be found and end up serving a year in county jail if you lie about being gay in the state of California. Back to the article, the author writes, LGBTQ-owned companies in California play other roles. In 2022, San Diego Gas and Electric spent $8.6 million, or 0.36% of procurement, on LGBTQ businesses, apparently including one that produced a training video on supplier diversity. In the animated character says in the video that the public utility paid for, "Never fear when you're an ambassador for excellence is here. I can show you exactly how to source diverse vendors." Other certified LGBT businesses in California include a sign language interpreter, as well as coaching firms for those who include a series to help people manage their feelings about the latest election cycle. Really, really great stuff for a gas and electric company in San Diego. In California, preferential public contracting is technically illegal, but of course we know in states like California and other blue states across the nation, laws, they're more suggestions than anything else. And if, of course, your religion, which is politics for those on the political left, if your religion if your religion is more important than the laws, then to hell with those laws, we'll follow whatever we want. So back in 1996 in California, 30 years ago, voters approved Proposition 209, which banned the state from granting preferential treatment based on race, sex, or ethnicity in public employment, education, and in contracting. So there's a law on the books, which makes total logical sense that we should not be discriminating or giving preferential treatment to individuals in government contracting. But again, that doesn't really matter. More than 2 decades later, in 2022, they rejected, the voters, an effort to repeal the ban. So that's on the books. That is not up for debate. That is not up for any sort of discussion. There is Proposition 209. It's been on the books in California for 30 years and makes it abundantly clear you cannot give preferential treatment to people based on race, sex, or ethnicity in any sort of public employment, education, or contracting. If you have a private business, obviously you have to follow some level of EOO laws, equal opportunity employment laws. But if you want to hire people based on those things, in large part, that is your prerogative to do so. But we're not talking about public businesses that are allowed to do what they want. We're talking about public, in many cases, ratepayer funded public utilities. The California Public Utilities arm-twisting regulation violates the spirit of the law, writes Christopher Rufo. The commission lists several specific, quote, goals for utility contracting rates. 15% to minority-owned firms, 5% to women-owned firms, and 1.5% to disabled veteran-owned firms, and most recently now 1.5 additional percent to LGBTQ-owned firms. It claims that these goals are not a, quote, requirement or quota. In practice, however, the agencies force these utilities into compliance by requiring them to collect extensive demographic data, submit detailed annual reports, list their plans for increasing procurement from favored groups, and explain, quote, any circumstances that may have not resulted in meeting their procurement goals. Despite the Commission's efforts, however, utilities and businesses don't seem interested in LGBTQ certification. Large utility procurements with LGBT-owned businesses decreased by 5% in 2024. With Supplier Clearinghouse, the group that actually manages all of these contractors, lists 3,750 minority business enterprises, with only 451 of them being LGBT certified firms. The City Journal and Christopher Rufo did reach out to the California Public Utility, of course, getting comment on this. No surprise there, they did not respond to the request for comment by deadline. The article wraps up by saying, the state imposed these rules based on the view that government spending should not merely purchase goods and services, but should also engineer social outcomes. Under this framework, buying a hammer from a firm owned by a black transgender lesbian has more social value than buying the same hammer from a firm owned by a straight white man. But Californians don't need an energy system delivered by gay contractors. They need an energy system that works. Utility regulators should be in the business of regulating utilities, not verifying contractors' sexual preferences. Companies should award contracts based on competence, quality, and cost, not the sexuality of the business's owners. And that's exactly what needs to be said here. That's the problem. That's the issue, right? And it's not just this discussion over LGBTQ or minority or veteran. That's not even the biggest issue. You see this throughout the rest of everything else in the country. You're seeing it even here in states like North Carolina, where what's happening with the Utilities Commission and what's happening with companies like Duke Energy. They're going after things like solar and wind energy, which we know is incredibly expensive and incredibly unreliable, going after those forms of electrical generation instead of things that make sense, like gas, like nuclear, like coal, that we know work and we know are reliable. Why is that being done? So that they can reduce CO2 emissions because of climate change. So you've got public utilities all across the United States that are making political decisions based on unverified reports of climate change that affects the consumer. Again, as I mentioned at the open, California has a long, long history of rolling black and rolling brownouts, where power is miraculously and randomly shut off for customers for hours at a time. Why is that the case? Because they do not have the generating capacity, the generating ability to provide power or water, whatever else it might be, to the customers, both residential and commercial, that depend on it. I think it's fair to say that most businesses rely on some level of electricity. I think it is fair to say that most people throughout their day rely on some level of electricity. And when that electricity is cut off for hours on end, that's a major problem. And that's what goes on in a state like California regularly. And as Christopher Rufo writes at the end of his article, the Californians, the people that live in that state, need an energy system that is reliable, one that will provide energy to its customers when needed, when it's hot, when it's cold, during a natural disaster. But of course, this all comes on the heels of a disastrous fire in the Palisades in Los Angeles, where what was happening? The reservoirs were drained, the fire hydrants had no water in them. Because California's leadership, California's government, California's regulating bodies are completely and totally incompetent. They are more worried about sexual preference and skin color than they are about providing services to their customers. That's the long and the short of this story. That's where their head is at. And this is in large part because of their politics. It's all politics. It's all religion. And you, of course, see where that leads us. In wrapping up this discussion on this brand new program rolling out through the California Public Utilities Commission, which requires, not allegedly, but seemingly requires public utilities in the state of California to contract with LGBTQ-owned businesses, those that are providing those services to public utilities across the state of California. Well, this has now got the ear of the United States Department of Justice. U.S. Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon said this week that she has now opened an inquiry into the commission's program, encouraging utilities to meet a, quote, voluntary goal of 1.5% procurement from state-certified LGBTQ-owned businesses. Dillon was on the Glenn Beck show this week and said, "I don't know how who somebody sleeps with is relevant to their provisions of utility-related support services. That's rhetorical. I think we know it isn't. It's nonsense. It needs to stop, and it's illegal." And that's exactly the case. It is, in fact, illegal. You are actively discriminating. And going back to the article over at City Journal from Christopher Rufo, as he was talking to this Red Ace company, as I mentioned back in the last couple of segments about the contract that they got with San Diego Gas and Electric, the owner of that company, Horton, told Christopher Rufo and the City Journal, quote, "If I was a straight white male, I might be concerned that I don't have the same opportunity. However, it worked out great for me." And I don't have any gripe here with Red Ace or with the proprietor of Red Ace and Marianne Horton. If this is what the California Public Utility is pushing, you'd be a fool for not taking advantage of it if you fit under these categories. I mean, you'd be a complete and total fool. So Harmeet Dillon, back on the Glenn Beck show, she stated this: "How does this help ratepayers? Everybody who consumes utilities in the state of California gets the best rate. It doesn't. Obviously, when you have set aside and have special contracts like this, you have inflation because people know that their status is a commodity and they can actually sell it because it is being forced on by the state to the ratepayers." Noting that is exactly what is going on in the state of California. Harmeet Dillon went on to say, "I think this is illegal, so we're definitely looking into what can be done about it by the Department of Justice. But for the other people who can do something about it is in some instances can be private parties who weren't picked for contracting because they didn't select the correct boxes." And that's exactly what this is. So that's the long and the short of what is going on in California. That is the long and the short of the complete and total discrimination that is taking place in that state through the California Public Utilities Commission. And so you have to get yourself into a position and be able to just sit down, reflect, and ask yourself, are you, as a public utility in California, are you providing the best service to your customers by going through this process? And I think I can accurately and fairly say that the answer to that question is no. Because again, you are ignoring, in large part, potentially ignoring the best vendor, the best contractor in the room over somebody's sexual preference. And again, this is not private business who is in large part free to do the vast majority of what they want. There obviously are some federal regulations as it relates to equal opportunity and things of that nature. So ignoring all that, this is government we're talking about. This is ratepayer public utilities that provide things like gas, electric, and water. I don't see how you can look at this in any other way than complete and total discrimination. A great comment coming in. These gay businesses can all inflate their costs knowing that they will have to be picked. Absolutely. And that's what Harmeet Dillon said and told to Glenn Beck on an interview that she was on this week. And again, I don't blame them for it. This is the completely ridiculous and stupid system that has been set up. And so, again, the same way that there's always this discussion about Donald Trump and wealthy people not paying their quote unquote fair share. They're not committing a crime. They're taking advantage of the tax code. The same way that you and I take advantage of the tax code, writing off things that you're legally allowed to do. That doesn't make you a scumbag or a bad person for taking advantage of what's in front of you. And so for these LGBTQ businesses in California, they'd be fools not to play this thing out to its fullest extent, to take advantage of this ridiculously stupid quote unquote goal that has been put in place by the California Public Utilities Commission. And so, yes, they can inflate their prices. And what happens when a utility contractor inflates their prices? Because so many of these services are ratepayer funded, meaning the way that they generate their revenue is by selling something to the ratepayers, your costs go up. The cost of your water goes up. The cost of your electric service goes up. The cost of your gas service goes up. All because this quote unquote goal has been put in place. And I just do not see, I cannot get myself into a position where I can see how this is a beneficial system for the taxpayers, for the ratepayers, for the residents in the state of California. I just fail to see any portion of this that helps actual people within the state. And that's kind of where my head stands with all of this. And as I just mentioned a couple of minutes ago, this is not just over LGBTQ or anything else. This is in general. When you have got government that is ignoring certain bidders, ignoring certain contractors so that they can fill some stupid, ridiculous goal, whether that be contractor or hiring goals, whether that be so-called green and renewable energy goals, this stuff has all been proven to be a complete and total disaster. We've seen it. It has played out in front of our eyes in real time. Yet so many of these states, so many of these bloated regulatory agencies continue down this path. It is why I have said for a long time, my favorite cabinet official in this administration is Lee Zeldin, the head of EPA. You can't find a worse offender of these nonsensical goals, these nonsensical benchmarks, these nonsensical practices than the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C., who rains down on states and municipalities and individuals all across the United States with their stupid regulations. Lee Zeldin has done an absolutely phenomenal job rolling back some of this nonsense, rolling back some of this garbage. Because what's the end result of these regulations? Every single time, the quality of your service goes down and the price of your service goes up. It is a lose-lose for the consumer. It is a lose-lose for the individuals that are buying water, buying gas, buying electrical service through a utility. Now, the businesses win, the contractors win, the public utility wins because they just continue to jack up rates, and it is you and I, the end consumer, that gets stuck holding the bag. You're seeing this in states like North Carolina right now. You're seeing it in states like California right now. And so Harmeet Dillon says that the Department of Justice is taking a look at this. They are now under some DOJ scrutiny for this incredibly illegal and discriminatory goal setting or contracting practice that they have rolled out through their Utilities Commission. I hope that the DOJ digs into this and that California is slapped down for it, because it is absolutely discriminatory and it is absolutely illegal. Great piece here from Christopher Rufo. I'll have the links over at patreon.com/Nick Craig. Well, that's going to do it for a Friday edition of the Nick Craig Show. We'll have our Nick Craig Show hangout coming up next week. That email will be going out a little bit later on today with the date for that. So stay tuned. Look forward to chatting with everybody next week for that. And I want to thank the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support of the program. For any legal questions or challenges, lawgroupnc.com. The Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook. It's also available 24/7 in your favorite podcast app. You can also listen online on air weeknights 9 p.m. on WBT Radio. Have a great weekend. We'll do it again Monday morning right here on The Nick Craig Show.